Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Michael Smith of Loyal is a Republican candidate in the 69th Assembly District. The primary is August 11. Mr. Smith, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me today.
Well, you say one of your big issues is economic growth in the rural areas. Can you give us a short thoughts, some pretty concise thoughts on how to help the rural areas grow, sir?
Well, economic impact on the rural areas has been pretty devastating right now with the pandemic and some even before that. If you look throughout our communities, a lot of our communities, our downtown areas are dying, and they're in dire need of help and maintaining, the infrastructure of those communities. I mean, in the community of Neilsville right now, if you walk down through the streets and that, you'll find a vast majority of those buildings vacant and not being maintained, and they don't have the finances to get those buildings maintained, and businesses wanting to come in there and operate out of them. Some of the infrastructures of our communities are suffering vastly too, and we as the state and the government, we have to look at ways of helping fund those communities to get them back and vibrant and get them buildings, a rentable, usable manner, so that some of the communities can have grocery stores back in them again, and so some of the infrastructure of the community can thrive again. When you see this kind of stuff happening and a building is torn down, it's something that's never again replaceable by its history, and it's just a vacant lot in a downtown area. So in these communities and in these areas of economic development, and we have programs to support that, but I think we have to better fund it, and we have to better take and develop it, and more importantly, we have to have a more active interest in these communities, particularly in the 69th area, to get them built back up, to make them, what they used to be and as beautiful as they used to be.
Okay, let's talk about some specific issues. The governor has warned that the pandemic that you alluded to may result in $2 billion with a B less in state tax collections. If you're a member of the Assembly, your choice would be cut current programs, spending programs, or raise taxes and fees. Where would you be on that choice?
Well, I'll tell you what, okay, over the course of my life and that I've seen our government, both state and federal, raise taxes, okay? And they've always promised us as citizens that, hey, when we get out of our fiscal problem, then that we'll go ahead and rescind those taxes. Last time I checked in Wisconsin, and somebody could correct me if I'm wrong, but I've not seen too many of those taxes rescinded. And I'm a business owner. I own a trucking company. I own restaurants. I own hotels, and that I own taverns. And what I have to do is practice fiscal responsibility. And so therefore, I don't buy equipment sometimes, and I don't make purchases, and I don't spend money on things that I can't afford. And I think our government needs to take a good lesson from business owners and how they operate. And if you don't have the revenue, just don't simply go out there and look for someone else to fund it for you. I mean, certainly I can go to a bank and ask a bank to give me more money, but is that practicing fiscal responsibility? As a member of the Republican Party, that's one of our biggest stands, that, practice fiscal responsibility, no more larger government. So yeah, we probably have to look at doing some program cuts, and not necessarily cuts, basically just, look at, setting some of the amount of money that we're going to place on those programs back a little bit. But if we simply start raising taxes, and that doesn't create any better revenue for us, it just simply allows us to spend more money, and then, doesn't solve the problem. The problem is fiscal responsibility.
Understand. This is a new subject. Americans know a lot more about how some police officers treat those in custody than they did 2 months ago. The governor's recommended a package of that would include minimal training standards for all police officers, barring chokeholds, barring no-knock warrants. Where are you on the whole issue of reforming police practices? Is there any need to change them?
I'll tell you what, that's a subject dear to my heart. I'm a former police officer in that. I operated as a law enforcement officer for many years. I also worked in the jails, okay? And I went through extensive training, and our academies train our officers well. And there are regulations, there are programs there that they teach us to do in that in certain situations and that. On a day-to-day average, and that one officer rarely would have to intact themselves in a situation where they're going to have to become dealing with a combative person. But at that particular point, there are programs that we are taught in the academy and ways to handle with combative people. And, I don't remember ever seeing a chokehold and that there are other things that we would do. And I think the best answer to the question is that as times change, procedures have to change, and reform has to be made. And there's no program that I can tell you today that as we change and times that we should not modify, adjust, and make appropriate to the times. And I think that simply just to say that you can't do this, you can't do that, I think there needs to be a little bit more intelligent thinking there. And, having been in combative situations with citizens and that, it's not a fun thing to do, but it's the thing that has to happen. But I think the best answer to the question is that we need to take a look at our way that we have our guidelines. I know that being in law enforcement, the guidelines are there to protect the citizens as well as our inmates, as well as officers. Unfortunately, sometimes in the heat of passion, people act in certain ways and aren't necessarily the way they are trained, and that they should not act in that manner. And therefore, that has to be looked into, and it has to be taught in how to handle stressful situations in a humane, safe manner for both the officer and for the person that's going to be arrested.
Okay. What's your position on legalizing medical and recreational marijuana?
Marijuana. Well, I see some of the states around that are doing it, and they're using it as a great revenue maker and that. But the fact is that I'm not convinced that that's the right thing to do. I mean, if it's done, certainly it's going to generate revenue for the state, depending upon how you utilize those funds. But medical marijuana, I can speak to you that personally. And that right now, my daughter-in-law has cancer, and she has some pretty rough days when she goes through her treatment. More importantly, my oldest son, Michael, went through cancer. And I'll tell you, nothing is more difficult to sit there and watch your son cry because the pain in his body is so overwhelming. And that. Now, some of the doctors have said that if he had the opportunity of using medical marijuana, that possibly would have subdued some pain he's feeling. So I guess to be direct, I'll be honest, I'm an advocate and supporter of medical marijuana use because I have two family members, one that's currently going through cancer and suffering, and the doctors say that is an avenue that could help pain reduce or subdue the pain. She's going through her chemo treatment. And more importantly, I watch my oldest son sit there and cry and shiver and suffer from the pains from the chemo and the cancer. And I'll tell you what, if there's something out there that can help my children or anyone else's family members not suffer the way they are and had suffered, I'm going to get on board with it, okay? Because I'll tell you, nothing worse than a parent to sit there and watch your children and that suffer, and there's something out there that could possibly make it a little less painful for them.
Thank you. New subject. The Constitution said the next set of congressional and legislative district lines will be drawn by must be drawn by the party in power in the Capitol. The governor has recommended a People's Commission to draw those lines and then forward it to lawmakers to pass into law. Who's right?
That's a tough question, I'll be honest with you. I mean, we've seen a line cut on before, and depending upon which side of the party you're on, they're happy and not happy. And, when you put one side in charge of something, is it fair to all? And the idea here is, to give everybody in government a fair voice. That's the whole process of being in government, is everybody's voice counts, everybody's voice counts. And to simply say, hey, because I have the majority, I get to decide how things are done, sometimes isn't always the right way. So that's a hard question for me to honestly answer and say who is right and who is wrong. I think, and honestly, I think both sides are right. I think both sides should have say-so in it. I think both sides should do it in an intelligent way that makes sure that it's fair to the American people, not to one party.
Okay. Well, you're a business person. You know all about property taxes. There are limits. There are caps on what school districts and local governments can levy in property taxes. If referendums pass, of course, you can exceed those. If you're a member of the Assembly, would you vote to keep those caps, those limits in place, or do away with them?
Right now, I think the current system is working, and I like the way it's set up simply because, as a property owner and as a member of our community, I know what my schools needs, and the residents of our community knows what our school needs. Someone down in Madison isn't going to understand what Loyal, Wisconsin, or Greenwood, Wisconsin, or Edgar, Wisconsin is going to need in our schools. And more importantly, the citizens, the residents, parents, and the people that are going to pay those taxes, and that through a referendum, if they feel that there's something that's necessary for our school, and that a referendum can be brought forth and the money can be amended and put forth on our property taxes. It gives the people to say about the things that go on in their government, and the people to say about something that goes on in their communities. Simply to have someone down Madison saying in a unilateral way that this is the way it should be, I don't like that. I don't feel that gives the voice of the people that actually are paying burdens on the cost of our school district. I would not say anybody in any community would take and turn their school down if there was something needed funding-wise that they felt be appropriate and necessary, that would say no to it. But that being said and done, allowing people to have voice in their communities and utilize things in their communities for their schools, having that say-so is very, very important. And I think under the current system, it supports the way it should be ran.
Because local governments are so dependent on the property tax, is it time to consider alternative sources of revenue for those local governments? Maybe broadening the 5% sales tax on items and services that are now exempt, or even giving local governments the ability to levy a 0.5-cent sales tax, something that now only counties can do. Please.
Well, again, it goes to the individuality. What goes on in one community isn't the same in the other. And the same as with county government in that. What's going on in Wood County isn't what's going on in Clark County. It's not going on in Taylor County or Price County. And that each government is unique. Each county is unique in that. And I think we need to have some flexibilities there to take and raise those taxes if necessary. I'm not a supporter of raising taxes in any way, shape, or form, but I understand that one has to have an avenue to take and maintain the resources that they provide to each community, each county government. And certainly if governments do things that the citizens don't like when we're raising taxes and therefore, there's always an avenue, and that's called putting them out of office in that. So I think we have to allow some flexibility there to our communities and to our county governments to have that latitude.
When you say you don't support tax increases, does that include not raising the state gas tax, 30.9 cents per gallon? That hasn't been raised in more than 10 years, but we don't have a stable source of funding for our highways. Would you consider raising the gas tax or no?
Well, it seems like there's always a few areas that we always chase for raising. Okay, we usually look at cigarettes, we usually look at gas, we use liquor. There's always a few areas that we always chase after raising revenue, and the thing is that I'm not an advocate of raising the gas tax.
Okay,
I don't support it. And I think there's got to be better ways that we can generate revenue. And more importantly, the money that we do generate for the gas tax, if it had to get raised, and that is going to be earmarked and put specifically towards the infrastructure of the roads, bridges, and that, or is it going to moved into other areas? It has to be specifically set for specific projects.
Okay. Let's talk about the COVID pandemic. It's really hit the economy hard. I'm sure you're aware of that. and the healthcare providers that state and local governments rely on. If you're a member of the Assembly voting on the next state budget, we've seen the role that hospitals are playing in fighting the pandemic. Should hospitals be made an even greater priority in the next state budget? Mr. Smith?
I think we must support our hospitals. They are one of the most key important things right now during the pandemic. Without hospitals, where do we treat our sick and where do we take our elderly and how do we take and defend against this coronas and that? So we have to support them. We have to make sure that they remain viable. And that, one of the important things is that we have to look at how today's seniors are affording health care and how they're living today. And that right now, just here in Wisconsin, and that we have probably about 9.5% of our population and seniors are living in poverty. If our hospitals fail, where are they going to go? How are they going to be afforded? And that the pandemic is going to come around again, I'm certain. But the fact is that we don't have hospitals and medical staff there to take and support us. We're going to be in dire situation. So yes, I support the fact that we need to budget funds to help maintain our hospitals. Okay.
Should businesses that follow the health and safety rules, either from WEDC or the federal Centers for Disease Control, on keeping their employees and customers safe, should they be immune from frivolous lawsuits?
Well, that's interesting because, if you watch TV these days, you see just about everything on the countryside is being sued by somebody for something. And the fact is that, I think we're going to have to adopt legislation that will protect businesses and organizations from being sued from frivolous lawsuits and that. Provided, of course, that they're following the CDC guidelines and they're doing the necessary cleaning and disinfecting, and that their staff are wearing the corrective equipment, and they're doing the social distancing. And that back in the 70s and 80s, and that if you recall, they had to adopt some legislation so that people couldn't be sued on the property insurance because somebody fell out on their front steps on an icy day. As long as one does what they call due diligence, practice due diligence, make sure that you're doing the necessary disinfecting and you're following all the CDC guidelines, and that it's an individual's choice whether they go out and where they go out and what they undertake themselves and do. To take and come into my restaurant and I'm following all guidelines, and for some reason, I don't know how, what, or where, you end up with the coronas, and then you end up suing me. My insurance rates goes up. I possibly will go bankrupt. We have to protect our communities. We have to protect our businesses. We have to protect our small organizations for their fundraisers. Otherwise, they're going to be asked to take and get insurance policies that are just going to be, through the cost you can't afford. And these organizations and businesses aren't going to be able to take and provide those funds and not operate.
Okay, another new subject. When local government wants to authorize a major public works project, should there be bidding standards and requirements that give preferences to Wisconsin companies? And the reason I ask is a study found that in 2015, out-of-state contractors were awarded $72 million in contracts for these local public works projects, but that $72 million doubled to $146 million by 2018. Should local businesses get a preference in public works projects, sir?
Well, if you read my campaign brochure, you'll see that I'm one of the people that are saying, buy Wisconsin first, okay? And that means, let's keep our jobs in Wisconsin. We want to keep our biddings fair. But more importantly, we want to keep our business in Wisconsin operating. That's our construction companies, that any business that's, in an open, fair bidding process to do any kind of infrastructure work and that. And I'm a very strong advocate of that. In fact, it's one of the campaign things that I have on my brochure. Buy American products, buy American, buy Wisconsin cheese, use Wisconsin labor, use Wisconsin trucking companies and that. So I want to build Wisconsin and then work on the United States.
Okay. And then the final question, you want to highlight any differences between you and your opponent on our opponents on August 11th?
Well, the vast difference between me and my opponents, I've spent a lifetime of doing many things. I mean, I've been a municipal judge. I've worked in the circuit courts. I've been a police officer. I've been a drug and alcohol counselor. I'm a business owner. I own several businesses right now, which I'm currently operating. I'm an emergency medical technician, firefighter, and that which I'm currently practicing. And, these are things that are life experiences. These are things that when you sit and talk about, being a dairy farmer as I was, and I'm sitting with a dairy group, an agricultural group, and then I understand the things that are going on there because I've been involved with them and I've lived a good part of life with them. When you start talking about operating small or large businesses, I own a small business. I operated for 12 years, a large manufacturing company with over 105 employees. And that, in addition, I worked in the mental health, drug and alcohol field, and that is drug and alcohol counselor. So I understand, the issues and the needs that go on there because I've been there myself, and I've worked with these families and afflicted members in law enforcement and in the court systems, and that I've worked in the courts. I've served as a judge, and I've been in a patrol car. I know what some of these police officers are going through today, and that because I've been there, I've done that. Certainly the times have changed, and the perils they face today are greater than those I faced back then. But the point is to have a candidate that at least understands what you're talking about, not only from the fact of saying, I read it in a book or someone else told him, but has personally lived it, personally experienced it. I think that's one of the most biggest attributes that I can bring, where I've not seen any other opponents have those kind of qualifications, that education, that experience, that knowledge, that life living things that people can relate to, and more importantly, that you can relate to yourself because you've done a lot of it. You've seen it.
Michael Smith of Loyal is a Republican candidate in the 69th Assembly District. The primary election is August 11th. Mr. Smith, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you for having me, and it's been a wonderful time, and have a great day.
Thank you, sir. You too.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.